Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Olivia, and we're so glad you're here today. Hello, 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 sister. What's happening in your neck of the woods, as Al Roker used to say?
You know what? It just
says?
occurs to me, I don't know when this is going to be live, but we are going on a family vacation in 2 weeks.
We are,
a week.
yeah. And you know what they say about family vacations?
I don't know what they say, but
on a family vacation, nobody can hear you scream.
And it's not really, it's just 2 nights away and a drivable distance, so we can all sleep under the same roof with my dad and my 3 siblings and whatever. And I'm going to make pancakes, and I realized that I have to get the recipe from Rob. Oh, it literally just occurred to me as we were recording this. So
speaking of Rob, who has become like an unofficial podcast, I don't know, just like
we just love him
/ we
love him. And let me say right now, right here, because I know that Rob's very supportive wife Jen is going to listen to this. Jen, you are invited on this podcast. We want to talk to you. We know that you're the more fascinating member of that couple, and he's pretty fascinating. So
yes. So after our last conversation with Rob, we invited him back on because he really likes to get into it and kind of like just have these amazing conversations. And so we asked him what he wants to talk about. And he said one of the things was to talk about kind of the transition going from a me to a we in a relationship and talk about relationships. And so we ended up having this really beautiful, what I love about talking to Rob is often he has like revelations while you're talking to him.
Yeah.
And it really is so beautiful. And so we had this great conversation, talked about marriage and trust and opening yourself up to people. And Jenny talked about her relationship and a little bit about fatherhood. So, you know,
I didn't talk about fatherhood.
No.
I don't know that much about fatherhood. Rob talked about fatherhood.
Yeah, but it was a really fantastic conversation with, just about the things that we don't talk about with relationships. And so enjoy the conversation with Rob. He will be back on again soon to talk about other things. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so that we can keep telling fresh start stories. We are back today with a friend of the pod, Mr. Rob Abney. You heard Rob on an earlier podcast talking about his experience and career pivots and parenting and marriage and all the fun stuff. And Rob is our first repeat guest. And so we're kind of going to delve into more general relationship topics today. So, Rob, you said you've been thinking about some stuff since we last chatted. What was on your mind?
Yeah, no, I was I think we got into a conversation. Well, I tend to go on random tangents, but we got into a conversation around relationships, and for me, as the resident married one here in our trio,
you are the resident. You're our token married guy.
Yeah,
we have to keep one around, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it, but the interesting relationship with getting married or even dating someone or new jobs, but becoming 2 people or a group, right? And the molding of the different mindsets and characteristics and upbringing experiences, and how you got to jive at some level, no matter who the other person is or other people are. And I was just curious to have that conversation with you guys and see where we net out at the end of this.
So I have an interesting question that I think this can all start with, which is, what do you think about the expression opposites attract when it comes to relationships? Because I have some strong opinions on it.
That's a great question. I think I think scientifically it works. I think in real life it's probably disastrous.
Yeah.
And I say that somewhat from experience, and not like, because me and Jen, for all intents and purposes, are opposites experience wise, but fairly similar personality wise
and values.
And I don't know that. Well, yeah, but I don't know that came, or I don't know that we landed on that agreement because our experiences were so different. So we focused on that for a long time. Or I guess I'll talk from my point of view. I focused on that for a long time. And so I would say technically we were, in my mind at the beginning, we were opposite and we attracted. Just the we'll call it fun, the fun times I had, versus Jen, who's a bit more conservative and I wouldn't call it naive, but just oblivious to certain things because she wasn't exposed to them in first person, right? And she may have been in the room when things were happening, but because she wasn't partaking in any of it, it totally went over her head. I just realized I'm still wearing my kids' sticker to get into their school. It's parent teacher conference. Speaking of opposites attract, but we were focused on all the like the bathroom, right? And I was a messy bathroom user, like washing my hands, brushing my teeth, water would be everywhere. And we were getting to like serious arguments about it because it was like I'll clean it up after, but she would come in behind me and clean it up, and it had to be neat. And I'm a Virgo, so I know where everything is, but I could care less where it is. And she's extremely particular, or has been particular. The labels have to face the same way, and so that was a big point of contention for us when we started living together. But then even our we're old, she's older than me, so that I would call that an opposite, right? Where I was in my life, she had already been, and in a different way. And so as I was being exposed to things or experiencing things, because she had already experienced them and she experienced them differently, it was hard for us to connect on that when I would hit a certain milestone. And she's like, well, when I did it, we did it this way. And I'm like, well, I don't care. And so I think from that perspective, absolutely opposites can attract. That said, like opposites typically explode. Like when
so that's like my thing is that I think that everything you described, though important, is sort of like surface level, right? And I think fundamentally, I see a lot of couples entering into these relationships where they're like, well, I'm an introvert and he's an extrovert. And like, yeah, we don't like to like hang out in the same capacity or socialize in the same way or any of these things. And I'm like, that's fine. But do you want to do that for the rest of your life? Right? Do you want to fight those battles for the rest of your life? And I feel like in my old relationship, like it was like that a lot of the time, where it was like, we just wanted to live our lives differently. And I think fundamentally, I always say like opposites attract, but like, should they stick? Like, do you want to like make that your lifestyle? And the sense that I get from you and Jen is that fundamentally you kind of want to like host dinner parties together and like socialize in the same way and spend your time in the same way. Cause I think so much of life is how you spend your time, literally what you're doing with your day. And I watch all these couples that you don't think it's a big deal when you're 23 and you get into a relationship and like, you know, you feel like, oh, I'm not codependent because he can go out with his friends and I can stay home and that's fine. And that is great. But at the same time, what does that look like 10 years down the road? I can tell you it's a guy staying out till 5 a.m. because he needs to socialize. And you're like, I just want to build a life with you.
Yeah, I think so. I met her, I was in my 20s and she had just entered her 30s. And so I went out, I met her, I was out, like we were drunk and we were having fun. And I was drawn to her. So I literally abandoned my friends and was with her every single day of every single week of every single month for like 3 or 4 months, to the point where we got tired of each other fairly quickly. But I was in my own world. And what happened with me is I started resenting the fact that I was in her world constantly when all I had to do was literally go outside and walk away.
Right. She wasn't keeping you there.
There was that other side of, I had set a precedent that we were together all the time. And I think it was more in my mind than her mind that like, if I leave, I'm breaking that precedent and then she's going to resent me for it. And it was like, again, and I joke with her, I didn't know anything, right? I was like 21, 22. I literally had no idea who I was and what I was, because my entire idea of who I was altered by all the chemicals that I was altering myself with, right? And so I think now, or even not even now, along the way, I realized how introvert I actually am. And my extrovertness was put on for all intents and purposes, right? Coping mechanism. I think we talked about that last time. But realistically, I don't want to be bothered. I like my space. I like my energy. I will invite people into my space, but I don't need to go into anyone else's space.
I'm very much the same.
And for me, And I think it worked out. It wasn't intentional, but us living an hour from the city, so me being close enough to home to say I'm home, but far enough away that like if people don't want to come and see me, they have an excuse not to, and it works for me, right?
Yeah.
And so when people come up, and we like to host parties and have people sleep over and cook all day, it's people who I actually want to spend time with.
Yeah.
And vice versa, they want to spend time with me, which I'm very protective of my space now. I wasn't before.
Yeah.
And I think that's my currency, for all intents and purposes, is I spend time with people. And if I'm spending time, not that I am like God's gift to the earth, but for me, if I'm spending time with you, it's because I actually really like you and love you and want to take care of you. The other folks, I can be around people that I don't like all the time. I can do business with people I don't like, but I get to stop at a certain point and remove myself from it. And that's the beauty of my space, is I only invite people who I want to spend a 24-hour period with.
I feel like I had a similar experience, which was that I came when I met my ex. I was 20. When we started dating, I was 23, and he sort of had this amazing group of, he had a group of friends that was all prefabricated, right? He'd grown up with them, and I never really had a group. And so I was like, wow, a group of people. And then we started working at this company, and it was like my people, and it was this rush of being with people that I liked, and we were really social. And then we moved to Queens, and we were really social, and he would have board game night once a week at our apartment. And I liked talking to everybody, and then I liked to go to my bedroom and close the door, and they could leave whenever they wanted. But sometimes people wouldn't leave. They would just not leave. And it was just a Thursday night. So it was like, what are you doing? And there was one friend in particular, and I'd be like, he doesn't get it. Like, everybody else leaves and this guy doesn't leave. And my ex would never say anything to him and never be like, hey, like, dude, you got to move it along. And it was like 2-3 in the morning, Thursday night sometimes. And then we broke up, and I was like allergic to people for a year. I couldn't be around anyone. I couldn't even be around my sister. Like, I would just go drive places and be by myself. And if anybody was like, oh, I want to go to the farmer's market with you, I was like, no, I do things on my own. I can't be with people. And it was funny to me because then I go to Scotland, and I'm with Thomas for a little while, and his friend David comes over one day just for coffee and to like drop something off. About 2 hours after David's there, Thomas looks at me and goes, all right, well, it's time for you to go. And I was like, I love that. Like, give me a heart. Like, I loved it because he was like, we're going to make dinner. We've got our evening plan. Like, he was like protective of our life together. And I felt like that was something I never got from my ex, which was a protective of our life together. This is our world. It was like, you can go to bed. Yeah. Like, you go to bed. And like, of course, that's fine sometimes. And of course, it's great to be okay with that. But I want somebody, and I wanted somebody, and I have somebody that is like, this is our life together, and this is where the door closes, and you have to be on the other side of it. And I thought it was a really interesting sort of dichotomy, like, like binary of situations, because that's what I need, is somebody that's like, it's time for you to leave.
Well, here's a question. So going backwards, when you did your, let's call it your self-exile, and did you, even though it was by choice, did you feel lonely?
No.
Or were you, that's interesting.
No, I have only ever felt lonely in the presence of someone that was supposed to love me and was not. I went to NYU, and my ex, who I was with in college, Peter, he was like he studied for the LSAT, and there was a lot that he was doing. And I was alone a lot of the time. Again, I've always had friends, but I've never had a group of friends. So it's always been sort of one off. And I was alone a lot. I'm very good at being alone, and I enjoy it. And I don't think I appreciated that enough. I don't think I appreciated the fact that I like to be alone because of, like, because of everything we've ever been through, right? Like, we're very good socially. Yeah. And I'm very comfortable socially. And I thought that meant I was an extrovert.
That's interesting. Because I immediately want to explore, like, when you become a we with someone else, you're literally giving up a piece of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you love yourself when you can be by yourself. Like, I can be by myself for a really long time. And at a certain point, I need to talk to someone because I can only talk to myself for so long. So it's more of like selfishness to expand my thought process more so than being around someone. But for you, you're extremely comfortable being alone for long, long periods of time, apparently. And so when you meet someone and you start to spend time, you literally have to shed off a piece of your skin.
No, I always tell Thomas that being with him is like being alone. It's the same energetic thing for me as being alone. He does
I
not
love how
draw
you
on
say that
me at
like
all.
it's a positive.
Well, it's fun. So actually, it's really funny. My friend Melissa and I she's a total extrovert. And
Yeah.
we always say to each other, you can understand if someone's an introvert or an extrovert by saying, like, the phrase being with you is like being alone. Is that positive or negative?
Yeah.
And for me, it's positive because I don't feel lonely when I'm with him at all. I feel very not lonely, but it is as energetically like renewing for me as being alone is.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So
So Rob,
Lydia,
yeah, I was just saying. So
for
no, I'm gonna
you,
ask. Yeah, for me, it's funny because I relate a lot to you, Rob, and I think I was gonna say when I got married, we at my bridal shower, Jenny asked a bunch of people for like the little like advice cards, like from the women in my life, and my aunt, which I will never forget, her advice was when your spouse picks up a book to read, don't talk to them. And for me, that was like the best and most interesting nugget that I took with me through my marriage because now that I'm finding out a lot more about myself through therapy and ADHD medication and anxiety medication, I am incredibly introverted and need an incredible amount of quiet time. And I'm a reader. I read my whole life. That's how I fill my cup. And when I was married, every time I would go to pick up a book or a magazine or whatever, or even watch TV, somebody would always interrupt me at that exact moment.
Yeah,
And
he
it
didn't
was
get that piece of advice is the
no,
problem. It didn't get
and
as far as
no.
him. No.
And it was so triggering. It became so triggering that I would stop doing that stuff, right? Because I didn't even want to start doing it. Because I knew once I would like pick up the book to read, somebody would interrupt me, right? The person I was with. So, it's just an interesting, like, I don't get lonely either. And I think it's because I value my quiet time so much, but I really related to what you said because I invite people into my space too. Right. So it's like you can come be with me, and that is like a cherished time for me. I always joke that like I will be there for people, but like not in physical form. Like I will do anything for anybody, but I will not like be there physically with you. So like I can support you in any way, like via the wires and waves, but I will not show up for you physically. Like I don't even go to my friends' weddings anymore. I'm gonna be honest with you.
There's so much to unpack there. I don't even know where
it's
to
so much
start,
to unpack. But I was
I
very curious
totally
though, because
get
I
it.
was really I'm thinking about my own situation. When did you feel like you and Jen moved from that energetic place from being separate to like the we?
Well, we were forced into it when we had kids.
Yeah.
And I don't think I fully thought about it before having kids, but we had to get on the same page about keeping a child alive.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me, or at least I actually know for me, I was still toying around with two different worlds. Um, whereas she was all in. And I think now granted, like I had a fun job and I was traveling for work and all that fun stuff. So I had an opportunity to escape. And it wasn't necessarily escaping parenting, it was escaping us and each other and our craziness. That was our relationship. But we didn't fall into the full we probably until like the last few years. I think actually moving to Canada jump started that a bit.
I imagine.
And it had its own downfall, right? Because we moved to Canada for a very specific reason, for her to take care of her family. And so I immediately wasn't number one. I wasn't number two or three. It was her mom, her dad, and then the girls, and then me. In my mind anyway.
How did you feel
and we
about
talked
that?
about that. Well, I think I rebelled in all kinds of ways that made made her life a living hell on certain days, and made it absolutely amazing on others. And it was definitely the ramping up and ramping down. I think when I was in my own feelings, I would ramp up, and everything would agitate me and bother me. And then when I got that attention, then I would ramp down and be okay. But then it was too much attention, I would ramp back up, and it was a weird cycle of nonsense. But we talked about it either right before we were moving. I think we had just sold our house and we were living with our parents, and we had a fight. And I don't know how it came up or what was said on her end, my response was like, I'm not in your zeitgeist. Like it's your dad and your mom.
Right.
And again, like her dad has MS and her mom has dementia and was going through it, and having episodes, both of them on different occasions. And we moved there down the street from them so that she could be there at the drop of a hat.
Right.
And even though I think I even I definitely suggested us moving to Canada when we originally were moving. We were going to LA. And I was like, oh, why don't we go to Canada after her dad got a little sicker? But even in that hero mentality, I didn't think of the downside at that point. It was all upside until I was living through the downside. I think that sparked a lot of resentment on my end, even though it was my idea. And so it's a weird.
Well, you probably wanted to be like lauded for the idea and then not also have to execute on it, right? Like, wow, what a great guy. He suggested we move to Canada, and then don't worry about whatever happens next.
Yeah, I mean, I was young when we did it, and it's so weird to say that because I'm 35 now, and this is what a decade
you were there
ago.
for like 5 years, right? You were like 29 when you made that decision. Oh wow,
yeah,
mid-20s. I mean, your brain was barely fully formed.
Yeah, and I was just I was taken by her. I'd do anything for her, right? And still this day I will. It's just it's not as it's not thought out now. Like now I just react because she's my wife and it's just second nature. Right. Then it was like I gotta impress her.
Performative a little bit.
Right. And so and that only does me a disservice, like in the long run. It does her one too, but I think it affects the person putting on that show more so than anyone's willing to admit.
So like when you become a we, and I think about this a lot because I was on the other side, right? And I remember watching my ex-husband take his stuff out of the house, right? And his parents came and they moved him out of the house. And it was a whole big, he was getting picked up from the worst play date he'd ever been on. And you know, I was thinking about
I don't mean to laugh at your pain, but that's hilarious that you just said.
No, that's exactly that was the vibe. That was like the vibe.
Take me home, mommy. And so, you know, I literally remember looking at my children were watching, right? They're standing in the kitchen watching, you know, their grandfather and their father take his stuff out of their studio. And it felt like an atom splitting, right? It felt like an actual physical atom was splitting, right? We had come together, we had joined forces, we were a team for all intents and purposes, right? We both helped each other in our careers and grow. We had these children and a house and all these things. And then it splits, right? So what's the moment? And I'm pretty woo, so I do believe in kind of energy and physical stuff there. What is the moment you think, and this is for both of you because you're both in committed relationships, that for both of you was that kind of like the zap of the atom coming together, right? Was there a specific time that you thought, well, this is like it, like we're kind of, our minds are melded here, or was it more of like a gradual thing?
I don't know that I thought about it. It just happened. I will say the shitty part about progress is that once it happens, it can't unhappen. Right? You can separate things, you can move on, like all these things happen, but you can't erase the past, whether it was shitty or not. Like you can't, it's there. It informed you. It changes the way you see everything moving forward. And I know people like to believe in big moments. I think of the small moments, the things that you're not even focused on that change your entire outlook on life. Because that's gradual. I think us coming together, I met her on a Sunday. We went out on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I went broke. Trying to, like, I was in college, right? So like I was spending my lunch money. But the after that, we just did stuff at the house or at the apartment. And it felt like this was supposed to happen. It wasn't like I have to ask her to be my girlfriend and all these things. Now there are ups and downs along the way of breakups and things like that, but there was no point in where I said, hey, let's go steady. We were just together. And I would say it was almost the most Zen-like thing, considering all the other relationships I had, and there was actual pomps and circumstance around becoming a girlfriend or a boyfriend. This was just, we were just there. We weren't there one day, and then the next day we were.
Did
and
you
it's
feel
been
different?
like that every day
Was
since.
like a different feeling to it? Like you knew it was special?
I wouldn't say I knew it was special, because I was pretty much an asshole for the first few years, if not
You're
longer.
so lucky that woman
Right?
is stuck by your
Right?
side.
Oh, for sure. But I wouldn't say it was special in that respect. I'd say it's special now.
Yeah.
The level of openness and honesty that we have now, because the fears are gone, and I think we had to work towards that. Like the trusting, and I don't trust very well, or very easily, and I do a lot of shady shit because of that. And I think that's one for the therapist to unwind with me.
Yeah.
But now I truly trust in her. I don't trust in a lot of other people, but I truly trust her, no matter what. And so if I'm having an anxiety attack, I go to her first. If I'm having an episode, like I've been clean for an extremely long time, but when something came up and I just felt like agitated, I knew where it could lead, I talked to her first. And she, for someone who didn't live that life first person, I think it took a lot of guts for her to be able to even have that conversation and not want to fix it, but just listen and hear me. But yeah, no, we're the best now we've ever been, ever. And I'm so excited to see where it leads to, because we're fully on the same page. Whether we like something or not, we're on the same page about it.
But how did you, because I struggle with trusting people too. And so how did you work through that?
I stopped putting everyone in my shoes. My favorite line for a long time was, I know what I'm capable of, so I know anyone else is capable of it. Right. And I believe, I probably still believe it to a certain extent. And I go into every situation, especially in business, I go into every situation with that in mind. I know what I want.
But not expecting good, expecting bad.
Oh, expecting absolute bad. And I'm prepped for it, right? Because like even Jen will ask me what I'm talking about when I'm talking to myself. Like, oh no, I'm strategizing for every possible scenario. Like I don't know the full detail of what will happen, but if I hear a certain word, I immediately know which plan to go to, right? Which is great in business. It's gotten me very far. In personal life, it's disastrous.
Interesting.
Because you're putting everyone in a point of defense, and they don't even know they're on defense.
Right.
And then when the aha moment happens, you're like, see, I told you. But I pushed it into that course that it was going to. So I definitely try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt now until proven wrong, and lead with trust, and lead with open and honesty, because it's less draining. It's very draining to plan for everything. And it doesn't leave much room for anything else once that moment's over, because you're just exhausted. And as someone who absorbs energy and like even now I'm hot, but I'm shivering, because we're like, I'm just going right. And and so those moments, I'm trying to see them more and try and avoid them, and not fall down my deep dark rabbit hole that I can go into.
But like, to just keep kind of going into that a little bit more, did Jen give you like a feeling or a basis of that she wasn't going anywhere, so that you could explore your trust like issues and kind of opening up to somebody who was more, I hate the term like unconditional love, but like that what you said to her wasn't going to
as close to unconditional love that you can get with a partner?
No, I wouldn't. Oh yeah, I would say I didn't accept it. I still didn't trust it, right? And so even though she was there through all the crappy things that I've done, and woke up the next morning and was still there, and was willing to put in the work to keep it going forward, I still was looking for a reason to be like, no, there's just something wrong with her. She's not like tomorrow. She won't be here. And I think it wasn't her proving it to me. It was just me accepting the fact that like she was my person, and I was hers,
which can be really scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like abandonment issues aside, like it's just a scary, it's a scary place to open yourself up, and connect with someone and intertwine with someone forever, or even for a moment in time. That I think we all know it, and we all see it, and we watch it in movies, and we read about it, and we have friends and we have family who've gone through it. But when that was us, we still we revert to what we think we know, and we try and avoid it at all costs. I don't think, I said this to you guys before, I don't think anything that we do is all that special. Like it's happened to someone else at some point in time in the last 2,000 years, if not longer. It's just the first time it's happened to us, and so because it's so special to us, whether it's positively special or negatively special, we keep it to ourselves, and we try and work through it on our own, as opposed to just having a conversation with someone and them going, yeah, that happened to me last week.
Yeah, they definitely were fighting over the bathroom in ancient Egypt with each other, so.
One of the things that me and Jen have stopped doing is trying to agree on the details, because that we would get into these arguments about like the lampshade being over, and then I'd be like, yeah, but you just said that I moved it and I didn't actually move it. She's like, that's not what I said. What I said was, and then we get on these like tangents of arguments that have nothing to do with what we were originally arguing about, and then we'd hate each other for 20 hours, right? Because we're just so frustrated with all the other mini arguments we had about
the way you argue, and you don't ever let me talk, and
and so it turned into us not necessarily just trying to solve the problem, but trying to stay focused so that we could alleviate that and move on with our day, as opposed to spending 6 hours in it. So the whole idea of let's just stay in this moment and stay here, as hard as we can, right? Has really served us, because we get through a conversation very quickly now, and it's not an argument, it's actually a conversation around being hurt. I think yesterday I said something, I meant one thing and she heard a different thing, and we talked about it, and we were able to come back to the middle very quickly, as opposed to years prior where we would argue for weeks, like literally weeks, and any moment that reminded us of the original argument would start another one, and we keep going down these rabbit holes of back and forth that literally solved nothing. It would just be over one day.
I told Olivia, I was talking to Thomas the other night, and I mentioned having like a salad with turkey in it, and he was like, yes, it's funny you call it a salad, it's like meat salad. And I was like, I don't know. I still, by the way, Rob, I've just resolved to not resolve this argument. I have no idea what he was talking about. I was like, you've heard of chicken Caesar salad before, right? And he was like, yeah, but that has the word chicken in it. And he was like, yeah, I had a salad tonight, except I cooked it and I served it with a burger. And I was like, what? I still don't know. And I know that if I had had that conversation with my ex, it would have become like an argument of like, you don't believe my worldview, and like, you don't understand me, and like, you never let me speak. And I was just like, I don't know if it's cultural. I don't know if it's language, like, but okay.
No, for sure. But it's funny because you are having the same experience I have with two different personalities, two different individuals.
People,
I'm having that same, or was having that same thing with the same person.
So I have a question for you, which is, I felt it was such a relief to like walk out of that relationship and get to walk into the new one and be like, you don't know all of my old bad habits. Like, this guy doesn't know all of my old bad habits. How does that feel? Like, I felt like with my ex, even if I got better, even if I improved myself, even after therapy, I still had to be like, I'm not that 23-year-old anymore. I'm not going to make those mistakes. Do you feel like that's something you have to contend with, of like proving to each other, like, I'm not going to do those old bad habits?
Yes, we have that conversation pretty often, right? Of what we're trying not to do. And I think one of the things that has helped us is being honest when we come back and apologize, right? And saying, I know I have a lot of work to do, but I'm better than I was yesterday. And that justification, again, progress, the shitty part about progress is you can't undo the things that have happened. But you can say, well, and I've said this, and it's very childish, but it's extremely important to me. This argument would have went for 3 hours last week, right? And now it only went for 10 minutes, so that's progress.
I
And
think
I
so.
think that's important to realize, because we can't use each other's past against us. Like, the beauty of having someone new is they literally have no past to stack it up against.
That was such a relief to me. That was such a relief to me, because I just got to be like, oh, me? I just came like this.
But for me, it's the opposite.
Right.
It's awesome when she says it about me, or when I say it about her, and I'm like, hey, like, you did a great job, right? And I think those pieces, it's important for the other person to recognize when their partner is making progress.
And I do force Thomas. I say to him, just so you know, in my last relationship, I really would have dragged this out. I do.
Keeping yourself accountable.
And that's awesome. He celebrates me, and that's the love and support that I need.
Like, it's a weird, again, like, I don't know a hell of a lot. I'm only 35, and compared to my parents and our grandparents and so on and so forth, I don't know anything. But the level of thought I put into trying to understand why I do certain things certain ways, and why she does, and how we can meet in the middle on that, has helped our relationship tremendously, because I didn't always think about it. It was my way, and my way only. And even she said something yesterday, which was really interesting. She admitted that when she came into the relationship, her way was the only way she was willing to go. And it caused a lot of arguments, because, like, something, bacon fat. I put bacon fat in a jar, right? And because my mom did it, and my grandmother did it, and that's just what I'm used to. And even her grandmother did it, and she was like, it's better for the environment if you just use a paper towel and slop it up. And I was like, okay. And then she started saying more. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I already agreed with you. Why are we continuing the conversation? And then later on in the day, she said, look, I know that when we first started dating, I know full well that I like things a certain way, and it was what I knew, and I knew that my way was the right way. And now I'm realizing that there are multiple ways to do something, and I'm open to it. And I think for us to be able to even have that conversation is extremely important, because it can go really bad very quickly when two people who have different experiences and who learn different things need to do things their way only. Because there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong.
But that's a testament to, like, personal growth too, right? Like, you have to, like, really, like, be able to, like, figure out, like, your triggers and your things, and, like, being able for you to just drop that fight and be like, cool, whatever, it's bacon fat. Like, it's just not worth a fight. It's really interesting, because in neurolinguistics, so I'm studying neurolinguistics right now to be a neurolinguistics practitioner. So we all have internal representations, right, of the way we filter the world, and how it's based on our own experiences, but it's also based on the literal language of how we speak. And everybody speaks a different language, right? So somebody might be more auditory, somebody might be more visual, kinesthetic, all these things, right? And in family therapy, what they often do is that somebody is the translator, right? So you might say, I see things one way, and she might say, I hear things one way. And then the family therapist has to literally translate the language between you guys. And I feel like so much of this becoming a we is figuring out this new language together, right? And, like, figuring out, like, the culture that you are, and, like, what your values and morals, and, like, almost like defining this new country that you guys live in together. Does that make sense?
No, for sure. And I do that in my personal or in my professional life very easily.
I was
Right?
gonna
That's
ask
literally what I
that.
do for a living. Right? Is figure out how to translate that language from when the customer sees or the user sees it to when we type it, right? And so I'm going through a brand exercise right now where we're redoing our website, and we have to start the language in terms of our terms, and then we have to translate it for what the user knows before they come into our environment. It's so easy to do in my professional life. I do it every single day. The moment I take off my headphones and I'm a regular husband, it's extremely difficult. And I think that it's like that Mr. Rogers moment. As soon as I take off my vest, I'm a different person, and I forget my training. And I'm trying to remember my training from personal life, because I think it's all the same, right? It's just
I was gonna ask you that. Right, because when you were saying before about how you were like, we sit there in the moment, we work it out in present time, and you put everything aside. When you're in marketing or whatever business, like we do this with social media, right? It's like you're working out things in present time. You're not looking at like everything else you've ever done before.
Right.
But like in relationships, right, it's like the opposite. You're like, let's take every single piece of data that we've ever collected about our relationship and put it into this pot, and then we're gonna.
So I'm the complete opposite of that, and I use what I know to inform what I do. And so I do unpack it all and think about, and I said, I'll call it strategic, right? I'm very strategic about everything. And so I actually do unpack it all. I'm like, again, I'm having this conversation with our head of product. And I'm like, no, we need to step back because he wants to make a change. And I'm like, no, we need to think about how this change really affects, because I know what will happen. And then in my personal life with Jen, I do the same to a certain extent, but I'm not as patient as I am in my professional life.
Interesting.
Right. So at a certain point, I'm just like, I can't have this conversation anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas at work, I'll have it for 8 hours because in my mind, it's my job and I have to talk about it. And in my personal life, I'm like, it's not really my job. I can choose to ignore this if I want to.
Right. You might enjoy it a little bit more with work too, I would imagine.
Yeah, but I think the
doesn't feel
older
as high pressure, I imagine.
Right.
Well, I think I wouldn't even say the older, the more informed I am about the importance of being on the same page, even if you disagree, at least being on the same page on what you're talking about, the more I have a little bit more patience every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a positive, because we're not going to agree on everything. And like, especially like our kids are getting older and they're becoming more aware of their Black side versus their Latino side, right? And so for Jen, that's a difficult conversation to have because she grew up in Canada, so she wasn't influenced by cultural differences the same way we are. Like, yeah, they have their issues with Native Americans and things like that, but in terms of Black and white, it wasn't or it isn't as big of a polarizing event as it is here in the States. And so us living in a predominantly white neighborhood, the girls are going to come up against some things, and she is coming around to figuring out how to have those conversations and not just pass it off to me.
Right.
But it is a tough conversation for her to have because she can only attack it from what she knows.
Right.
So it's not just about getting my experience, it's about educating herself, and she's doing almost to the point of going too far and getting anxious around it, because it is a lot. Once you start to digest civil rights in American history, like it's like you can't help but cry, right? And so
we'll have you back on to talk about all of that.
Especially with what's going on. What's going on, like where's Mississippi right now? Like, you know, there's so many good things happening, and it's just so awful what's going on in the world. It's hard enough to digest as a piece of the past, and then when you digest what's still going on and they're bringing back, you're like, it's awful.
Oh, and for sure. And that's a we moment. Like what happens when you put two cultures together and all hell breaks loose for 70, 80 years in present time, and then hundreds of years post-present. And then she's Portuguese, right? So
right. There's a whole other element to it, right? I wonder how it is though with the kids of being that we together, now that they're getting older. What that experience, like, you know, Olivia and our parents got divorced when we were younger than your girls. And even though we have a stepdad who's very involved, like, I think it's different when it's your two parents that are married and have been married and are your biological parents. What do you think that experience is like? What is that experience like as the parents? And then also, what do you think you're teaching your girls about creating a we in a relationship?
That's a great question. I think they've been old. Like, we couldn't always hide our fights from them. Just because sometimes we were in a small apartment.
Yeah, and you don't need to always.
And you shouldn't.
Yeah. And so I think they get to see in a short span of time, they get to see what it's like when mommy and daddy are at odds, and then what it's like when mommy and daddy are on the same page consistently. And it definitely informs their relationship with each other and then their relationship with each of us. Because kids tend to gravitate towards one parent or the other. They love both parents, but they go to one for one thing and the other for the easier things. So I definitely think they've benefited from us being at peace. I would say in terms of what it means to them, I think they're too young, well, relatively young, for me to even understand, or them to be able to articulate in a way that I can understand what it means to them. I know that they both have very strong personalities, and so I think they will have to, similar to me and my wife, when they find their special one, whether it's the first boyfriend or the husband at some point in life, they will have that struggle with their strong personalities colliding with someone else who may have a weaker personality or a stronger personality, because it can go any way. And I'm curious to see, just because I know the two of them and how they explore life, I'm curious to see what it's like for the other boy or girl who they end up with. Because I know as a parent, like, they can be difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, some poor kid is in for the time of their lives.
Yeah, I feel the same way about my boys. What was it like, though? You didn't have a model of a husband. Like, where did you get, like, where were you informed about this, like,
I don't know.
narrative?
I don't know. Because Jen says it quite often, not as often anymore, so that may be your problem. I have to figure out. But she used to say quite often, like, where do you get it from? Because I love my girls, and I'm tough on them when I need to be. And like, we were playing baseball the other day, and I'm just going along with it as it happens, right? I'm figuring out as it goes. I read books every so often. I see articles on what other people are doing. I follow people, and she sends me people on social who have quotes and ways to deal with kids. Because one, like, Leia has a strong personality, and she's like me. She's oblivious to the world to a certain extent. She's very specific and very direct, and she can't understand why you're upset when she's just telling you the truth. And she totally gets that from me. But I don't know. I'm literally making it up as I go, and I've been connecting with other dads and parents in general, trading notes, because I think that's the best way to learn something. But it's I don't get it right every time. I fail quite often and quite aggressively.
But what about as a husband? Like, as a husband, how did you have, like, I mean, literally, like, did you watch
still making it up? No, I mean, that was a lot of it, right? And seeing other parents, or at least what I could see of other parents when I was around them, and how they react towards each other. But for all intents and purposes, I'm making it up as I go. Things that don't work, then we scrap those, and things that do work, we try and compound them.
You know, I read a statistic that 70% of relationships 70% of time in relationship, you get it wrong. In good relationships, 70% you get it wrong. And so the most important part is repair. And I think that when we talk about not arguing in front of our children or arguing in front of our children, the important part is for them to see the repair, right? And to see to see that it happens. Because I think of all the people I know who are like, my parents never argued in front of me, so I was really shocked when my mom left my dad, you know. And it's like, that's not helpful. Not
at all. It's so out of left field. And I don't know from experience, but I would assume that's when a kid blames themselves. I didn't see anything happen, so it's got to be me.
Right, it's got to be me. I'm the only factor here. You know, and I even think about that with Olivia's kids. You know, Olivia and I fight once every 4 years. But when we do, I try like to show the kids, and Olivia too, obviously, but from my perspective, I try to show the kids, because there's not, you know, a mom-dad relationship right now that, like, you can just come together and, like, it doesn't, you know, the repair, and they have each other. Like, Olivia's boys have each other and your girls have each other. And I think that those relationships are so fundamental in building those romantic relationships later, because they're really your first long-term partners.
Well, even we do it with them more so than we used to, admitting when we're wrong with them. Right? Like, I said something to Leia, or no, Jen said something to Leia, and she didn't like it. So Jen immediately apologized. I'm sorry. Just so she knows that like that dynamic is not just all power or
it's respect.
Parents have the power and children
You know,
don't. Yeah, exactly.
We had something happen the other day. Olivia's older son, Weston is 9. He came home from school and he realized he'd forgotten something he needed to study. And it was like, Olivia called the school. They said the school was open. The school's 3 minutes down the road. We were just going to go pick it up. It wasn't a big deal. And he was panicking. And Olivia and I both walked by and we're like, getting our shoes. We're like, it's not a big deal. It's fine. And he looked at us and he goes, it's not fine. And I said, yeah, you know what? You're right. It's not. No,
he said it is a big deal to me. That's what he said.
It is a big deal to me. That's what he said. He goes, it is a big deal to me. We said, it's not a big deal. He goes, it is a big deal to me. And I looked at him and I said, you know, I'm sure Olivia would have said this if she was in the room, but I was the one that was saying it to him. And I said, you know what? You're right. It is a big deal, but it's not insurmountable. We can figure it out, but it is a big deal. And even things like that, where it's like, just validating their experience and being like, and not being, because for us as adults, we're like, it's a 4th grade Latin test. Like it doesn't matter, you know, but for him, that is the pinnacle of his experience, you know.
Yeah, that's all he knows right now. It's the biggest deal. And I say we're very selfish people, and that's a good thing because like our brain is trying to keep us alive, but it's all about us. So when you think about, and I was a friend of ours was talking about her childhood, and the story was her mom. She watched her mom get into a fight with her brother over something massive, and after that, the mom was still in her space of anger and treated her mean.
Yeah.
And immediately she was like, well, what did I do? And then she went into, well, I did something. That's a natural response.
Right.
Because even though we witness the argument, we know why that person.
Right.
You know, we can remove ourselves from it and go, okay, now the moment's changed. We can be happy. That person can't. And so we don't comprehend that. It's like, oh, why are you being mean to me? And so we
then you internalize,
But exactly. And I think it's very important to tell kids,
it is.
And I get why you're upset.
Yeah.
And like from as a father too, Rob, like it's so important for your girls to see that you respect them on like a human level, because that's the nugget that they're going to carry with them, like in other relationships, right? So like you're setting the bar and you're doing such a beautiful job at it. Like we all fuck up all the time, right? Like we definitely, I mean, I've learned more about parenting from watching Daniel Tiger than anything, right? Like I used to watch and I was like, I'm just going to mimic mommy Tiger. Like I'm just going to do what she tells me to do. Right. So like, but like I truly believe that like the relationships that we build with our children are the ones that they're going to carry over right into romantic and business relationships. And so, you know, helping them understand respect and boundaries and that they are worthy starts so young. And I think that people don't always realize that. Okay, before we let you go, I have a question and then we'll let you go. You know, we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are single and dating and you know, trying to kind of figure out their relationship status. As somebody that got into a relationship young and has grown a lot in that relationship, what would you say are some tools that you use to kind of get, because you know, from point A to point where you are now?
Ooh, that's a big one. I would, how do I keep that simple? I would say, well, I wanted to say trust your instincts, but I would say absolutely don't trust your instincts because sometimes they lie to you. I would say have an idea of who you actually are. I think that's extremely important. And I don't think we work that out early on in our lives. I think it takes a minute, but being willing to be honest with the person you're with and say, I haven't figured that out. I'm still working on this part. And I think those conversations are extremely important so that the other person knows where they stand. And it's not, as you're working something out, it's not in spite of them or because of them. They just happen to be in the space when you're trying to figure out your life. Because that's the whole thing about becoming a we is there's still 2 individual people working through a bunch of shit. And yeah, they're also working through things together. But like when you think about our family life and our family dynamics and our relationships outside of that other person, there's a lot to work on. So I think the patience and the willingness to have honest conversations and saying, I was mad at something else and you just happened to be in the room, so you got the brunt of it, and then apologize for it. I think those are extremely important conversations and you'll figure out very quickly if you're meant to be with someone or not by if you're willing to have that conversation, if they're willing to accept it.
I love that. Well, I need you to start percolating about what you're going to come back to talk about.
Next idea.
I got all kinds of things.
Okay, we'll have you back. Well, thank you as always for sharing and chatting. And like, these conversations are so important to have, because like once we can start talking about it, everybody else will start talking about it. And, you know, that's when honesty and vulnerability come out and people can actually see growth and relationships form. So thank you for chatting with us.
Likewise, enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here and we're proud of you. Until next time, brave one.
A Fresh Story is brought to you by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to start again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at freshstartsregistry.com/podcast.
As always, we want to remind our listeners that while we strive to provide accurate and helpful information, we are not medical doctors or mental health professionals. We want to remind you all that the information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. We highly recommend consulting a qualified healthcare or mental health professional for any concerns or questions you may have. Remember, we are a podcast, but we are not licensed medical professionals. Always consult with your healthcare provider for any medical decisions. And as a gentle reminder, all opinions are our guests and do not necessarily reflect our own.